Today we're going to do some sine law and cosine law practice. So up to this point we've been learning about sine law and cosine law. We learned last week how to calculate side lengths using sine law and cosine law, and yesterday we learned how to calculate angles using sine law and cosine law. So for sine law, our formula is sine A over A equals sine B over B equals sine C over C. And there's just the one formula. Whether I'm finding a side or an angle, I use the same one. For cosine law, there are two different versions of the formula. They're just rearranged versions of each other. And that's just because the first formula here, A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2 times B times C cos A, is easier to use for side lengths. And then cos A equals B squared plus C squared minus A squared over 2BC is easier to use if you're trying to find an angle. And that's because the side length is by itself on this side, the angle is by itself on this side for this one. So we're going to go through 4 examples together. We're going to try to figure out what method we would use for each one, and then actually try doing the calculation. So I'm just going to zoom in a little. And the question says, solve for x in each of the following. Round your final answer to 2 decimal places. So our very first triangle here, we have a side of 110 centimeters, a side of 145 centimeters, an angle of 105 degrees, and we have x. So the first thing I need to decide is, are we going to use sine law or cosine law? So sine law I would use if I knew an angle and the length of its opposite side. So in this triangle, the only angle I know is this one, the 105 degrees. I'm just going to refocus. And then across from that, I don't know that side length. I don't know this angle. I don't know this angle. So I wouldn't use sine law because I don't have an angle and an opposite side that I know. So that means I'm going to use cosine law. So from here, I have a choice of 2 different formulas. So how do I know which one to use? Well, we're trying to find x, and x is a side. So since I'm trying to solve for a side length, I would use this one right here. I use this formula when I'm looking for a side, and I use this formula here when I'm looking for an angle. So I think we're going to use A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cos A. Okay, so I'm going to take my triangle and label A, B, and C. So I always start with the angle, and I call that A. So in this question, there is only the one angle, so that one's easy. It's going to be my angle A, and then your choice, B and C, it doesn't matter which corners you let be which. Across from angle A is side A, across from angle B is side B, and across from angle C is side C. Okay, now another way I would know to use this formula instead of this formula is that I'm trying to solve for little a, and this one here has little a on the left-hand side of the equation. Okay, so I'm going to write down my formula. So I have A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cos A. And then I'm going to substitute in all the things I know from my diagram. So little a is side x, so x squared, equals b, which is 145 squared, plus c, which is 110 squared, minus 2 times, there's that b again, 145, times c again, which is 110, times cosine of, oops, you can't see that, angle A, which is 105 degrees. Okay, so I notice that I have the variable on the left-hand side and then a whole lot of numbers on the right. So I am going to use my calculator to calculate all of this stuff all together. So the trick here is do not hit equals until you get to the very end. So 145 squared plus 110 squared minus 2 times 145 times 110 times cosine of 105 And then you want to hit equals at the very end. And I get 41,381.32754. I'm going to write that whole thing down. We don't round until we get to our very final answer. And this is not our final answer because we are looking for x, and this is x squared. So there is one final step that we need to do, and that is to cancel out our square by doing a square root. So you want to square root both sides. So on my calculator, I can just hit my square root button. If you have one where you see the square root show up on your screen, you would do your square root and then just hit equals. So I get 203.42. And then if I look at the next digit, it's a 4. So I'm not going to round it up. I'm going to leave that as 42. So 203.42. Since I rounded, I'm going to put a dot over my equal sign, and this is a side length, and all of the other sides in the question are marked in centimeters, so this is going to be 203.42 centimeters. And there we go. You can join me in the next video to see how to do question B.